Hey there! Welcome to the lecture on computational trust in the lecture series Protection in Network Systems. Usually at this point, I'll tell the audience why it's called Protection in Network Systems and why this is funny, but as this lecture is being recorded, I'd rather not tell you. It's a fun story and you might ask the colleagues from TK Lab, but probably not me. This is a recording, and before I tell you who I am, what I'm going to talk about, why we have this Provadis logo on here and not the TU Darmstadt logo alone, let me tell you the following. I know this is a recorded lecture. We have pandemic times, you can't come to the university, I can't do this live with you, and I really like to do lectures live or at least synchronous e-learning, so you can ask your questions and everything, but this is not possible here. So I know that it's probably for you late in the evening, you're sitting at home in your desk or on a couch and have a bottle of beer or a cup of tea in your hands. I recommend the cup of tea because it's more healthy, but if you want to drink beer, it's totally fine, or wine or whatever you're into. I'll have this soda here, which is probably too green for the green screen. So I'll have this soda and it's totally fine for you to drink. And as this lecture is being recorded and as I don't like speaking to a wall, I'll just pretend that you are a live audience. So like, hey, you over there, listen carefully. And you, yes, it is fine to do Tinder during my lecture, but please do not make those weird noises. Okay, I'll do it like that. And if you think that is unprofessional, always keep in mind that it's actually fun that drives the extra mile. And this lecture is somewhat like an extra mile for me because I'm not employed at TU Darmstadt. I'm just an ex-employee. I did a lot of research on that with these great folks at Telecooperation Lab. So I decided, okay, I'll contribute this lecture to the lecture series. And here we are, and I'm the one who wants to have a little bit of fun during that lecture. Okay, Protection in Network Systems. My name is Florian Volk. You can contact me over various channels. I have a personal email address over here. Can you see my mouse? Yes, I can see the mouse, so you should be able to see it too. And I also have a professional contact with Provadis Hochschule, which is actually the university I'm working with right now, and you can always contact me. So that's it. A little bit of advertisement at the start because I need a reason that my university allows me to give a talk here. So Provadis Hochschule is actually a private university in Hesse. It's located in Frankfurt Höchst. We're doing only duales Studium, which means not only do you study, but in your spare time, you have a job aside. Well, actually, it's the other way around. But anyway, that means it's a very high load on you as a student, but you also have a decent income. And unlike me, you can eat other things than rice and pasta during your studies. We're located in Frankfurt Höchst. We have a few courses of studies that might be relevant to you. Business Information Management, which is just a fancy name for Wirtschaftsinformatik. We have a bachelor course here. We have a Computer Science bachelor, and we have a Technology and Management Master's course, which is something like a Computer Science Master. It's a mixture of Wirtschaftsinformatik, so information systems, and Computer Science. That's it. So let me talk a little bit about me so that you can build yourself an impression why you should listen to me or why not. Actually, this lesson is probably irrelevant for the exam, so you should listen to me anyway, but the long story short, here I'll motivate why it might be worthwhile to listen to me speaking about computational trust. I collected a few degrees during my early career, so I have a bachelor's and master's in computer science from TU Darmstadt, actually with something called IT management, which is just a very weird mixture of law, economics, and lots of computer science, which is the fun part of it. I also did a PhD in computer science on this topic, computational trust, so I might be able to say one or two things about that. Sometimes I wear a tie, as you can see in this picture. Not today, because it's fine and we're sitting here and I'll have a drink with you. It looks actually fun on this green screen. It's a fake green screen, of course. There are some jobs I had which make me consider that I might be someone you should listen to if it's about computational trust. So for a very long time, I was research strategy coordinator at TK Lab. This is the lab that actually organizes this lecture, if you don't know. So at TU Darmstadt, I did a lot of teaching. I did a lot of research, mostly in the areas of cybersecurity and later in future energy networks. So this is where the power from your outlet comes from in the future. At least that's what we hope. After leaving TK Lab, I became CEO of something called House of IT. If you haven't heard of it, that's fine. Makes me a little bit sad, but that's what usually happens. People haven't heard of it. House of IT is a non-profit organization somewhere in between industry and the state of Hesse, and the aim is to shape the digital transformation in Hesse. So I was the CEO there, and afterwards I went to Provades Hochschule, where I am currently located at. I teach computer science and information systems there, and I'm Studiengangleiter Wirtschaftsinformatik right now. And I'm also active in the Netzwerkgründung Südhessen, which is an entrepreneurial network of a lot of organizations which just want to help people in creating their own companies, starting their own businesses. So that's my background. Let's head over to the topic of the lecture. Hi, you over there, don't fall asleep. It'll be interesting in a few minutes. Okay, so what are we going to do today? I'll speak mainly about 4 topics. Introduction to computer science. No, not computer science, of course. I have no clue on that. Oh, that's actually one of the lectures I'm giving right now. Anyhow, first topic today will be Introduction to Computational Trust. So what is this computational trust? What is it? Have I heard about this? You probably haven't, because it's not very popular, but it's very important, and I'll just explain you what it is. Then how you model computational trust in the second part. I'll present you also in the third part 2 applications of computational trust where it can be really applied in real life. One is the Web Public Key infrastructure, and the other one is rating decomposition. Don't worry, I'll explain that later if you have no idea right now, in case you have no idea right now what I'm going to be talking about. And I'll end with the inner workings of computational trust, which is more like a philosophical view on the whole thing. And I wrote a book on that. Whoa. I wrote a book on that. You can buy the book. You probably shouldn't buy the book, but you can buy the book, and I'll be happy, because you would be probably the 5th or 6th person in the last 7 years to buy this book. Anyhow, everything I'll be talking about here is in detail in this book, but you probably won't need the book. Anyhow, I wrote a book about that, and I won't profit at all unless 200 or 300 people of you buy the book, which is rather improbable. I should stop speaking about the book here. Okay, let's head right into the topic, Introduction to Computational Trust. So when we're talking about IT security, we are usually talking about 3 things. The so-called CIA triad. Nothing to do with an intelligence agency in another country. The CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And these are the topics you are usually confronted with when you think about IT security. So confidentiality means keeping things secret. Like you have an information and you want to share this information with a group of people, and you want only this group of people to know about it. And yourself, of course, but no one else. A typical means to achieve confidentiality is encryption. You just encrypt the information. And if you do this good and correct, so proper encryption, only those who should know how to decrypt the information can actually access the information. That's how you achieve confidentiality. Then there's integrity, preventing things from being changed. You have an order, blah, blah, blah. I'll order 2 boxes of beer, 2 crates of beer, and someone in between maliciously changes the order to 2 boxes of Earl Grey tea, which I would also take, but 2 boxes is a lot of tea. So you don't want someone to change information after you released it. A typical means to achieve integrity are digital signatures and stuff like that. You've heard about this in your other lectures. And the third thing in the CIA triad is availability. Keep things running. keep things available to the users, which means, over provisioning, have more things than you need. So in cases of high load, you can cover this higher load, this higher than usual load, or prevent denial of service attacks, things like that. That's availability. But IT security is actually more than those three things. And we sometimes speak about the extended CIA or the CIA plus or whatever you want to call it. And that includes usually authorization and access control, which means you want to limit access to certain information or systems or whatever only to a group of legitimate users, which poses two questions for you. First, how do I identify user? And second, how do I control, if I have identified a user, that this user only does what this user is supposed to do? Authorization and access control. And the last one I'll be talking about today, and this is the central topic of this lecture, are trusted systems. Trusted systems are means to ensure correct behavior of things, of systems, of information, whatever. And most trusted systems professors and most trusted systems teachers actually ignore 50% of what trusted systems are. And these 50%, well, this is this lecture. So switch over to, I had an animation there. Great, I'm prepared for this lecture. Isn't that great? Yeah, it is. Cheers, folks. Okay, so let's discuss what is this trust. I mentioned trust quite a lot in the last 11 minutes. And I said trust so often that you can make a drinking game out of it. I do not recommend it, but I know that some of my students do that. Anyway, what is trust? When we speak about trust in the area of computer science, we usually differentiate in between trusted computing, which is the popular kid in school, which is what professors usually speak about, trusted computing, which we usually call hard trust. Trusted computing means we have a technology that guarantees certain properties, like correctness of a system, behavior of a system, things like that. So that is trusted computing. On the next slide, I'll have an example. If you think about TPM chips right now, you're on the right track. The other thing in trusted systems is computational trust, which I will be talking the rest of the lecture about. And computational trust, not very popular, is usually called soft trust because it gives no guarantees, but it also works in scenarios where trusted computing doesn't work. Whenever trusted computing tries to employ a technology to give a guarantee, computational trust does the complete opposite. Computational trust tackles the areas that can't be handled by hard trust by adapting the human notation of trust. So we trust other people. I trust you in not leaving my lecture early, even though I can't control it. You trust me in being capable to speak about this topic. There is no technology employed to ensure that this trust is somewhat justified. It's just the human sense of trust. You trust your parents or don't. You trust your friends or don't. Things like that. One big advantage of computational trust is, you can do important things that couldn't be done before. Things that trusted computing can't do. The negative aspect of computational trust is actually it gives you no guarantees. It gives you probabilities, it gives you subjective statements, but there is no guarantee in computational trust. Let me give you an example. You want to buy a book, maybe the one that I showed you earlier. You want to buy a book at Amazon. And you browse the Amazon webpage and you don't want anyone else to know what you're looking for. Okay, you encrypt your connection. Your browser to the Amazon server's encrypted connection, TLS, whatever, HTTPS, you know it. That's easy. That's something we can do. That's crypto. No need for computational trust. Then, afterwards, you have selected your book. You have put it in your basket or whatever kind of technology they have to collect all the things you want to buy. And then you're about to pay. And you pay with credit card. Amazon doesn't process your credit card payment themselves. They use a credit card payment provider for that. So actually that's a third party. You give your credit card data to Amazon, and Amazon gives it to someone else to process the payment. Your connection to Amazon is encrypted, and you don't know anything about the connection to the third party provider. Well, there's a technology called remote attestation, so you can actually make assumptions on the systems of the third party. You can have guarantees. Great, problem solved. No need for computational trust. Do we really need this for something? Yes. After you have paid, they ship the book to you. An actual real life book. And you get it to hold it in your hands, to sniff the scent of newly printed book. And this is delivered by your mailman. And your mailman doesn't have a chip in his head. And we don't want mailmans to have chips in their heads in order to guarantee certain properties. You need to trust the mailman. Like delivery service number 1 delivers your parcel actually in 9 out of 10 cases, and delivery service number 2 does it in 1 out of 10 cases. We know this. It's probably blue colored, but I'm not here to make prejudices against delivery services, but you know what I mean. So in the end, you have one delivery service that gives you a good outcome in 9 out of 10 cases, and another one that gives you a good outcome in 1 out of 10 cases. And you know which one to choose next time. This is where you can employ computational trust. This is where you do it. Isn't that great? Trusted computing can't help you there. You can use computational trust. And that's why we are speaking about computational trust today. But first, on this slide, I'll give you a short primer on trusted computing in case you haven't had any lecture on that yet. Be aware this is not what this lecture right here is about. It just gives you a primer and introduction in order to enable you to differentiate trusted computing from computational trust. Because it sounds very similar and most people don't know the difference, and I think you should know the difference. So I'll tell you. As said before, trusted computing is a technology that guarantees correct behavior of other technology. And it's mostly driven by the so-called Trusted Computing Group, TCG, and it has worse reputation than it actually deserves. Trusted computing came up in a time before Spotify and Netflix, so people feared that trusted computing actually prevents them from copying MP3 files and stuff like that. At least that was what was primarily in the media. But other than that, trusted computing actually gives you a lot of cool stuff. It gives you remote attestation, this verifying a third party I mentioned earlier. It gives you safe updates, as in, yes, the update is from the company that I want to get the update from and it has not been tampered with. It gives you system integrity protection and stuff like that. And it does this by giving you a trust anchor, a thing that you trust. By definition, axiomatic, trust a thing. And most of the time, this is a TPM chip. It's an actual physical piece of hardware, like can you see that? Like these. Yeah. They just put this on your mainboard, on your whatever. This is not a TPM. This is actually a voltage divider, but come on. The camera feed is so bad, you wouldn't notice. Okay, they give you a physical piece of hardware or something which acts like a physical piece of hardware. And whenever you turn on a computer or a system, this thing is turned on. And the first thing this thing does, it measures the other hardware of your system. So it checks your system before the system boots. Isn't that great? And if this check is successful, if it says, yeah, hasn't been tampered with, then the hardware is trusted. Not before. Only the TPM is trusted. And the TPM, after checking the hardware, is delegating its trust to the rest of the hardware. And afterwards, it gives control to the hardware. And the computer regularly boots, starts up. That means the hardware is now measuring the software, mainly the operating system, on your computer. And only after this measurement has been successful, and the hardware believes that the software hasn't been tampered with by doing checksums and stuff like that, only after that has happened, the software is given control of the computer. And so on. So you build a chain of trust But at the early beginning, there is something like a trust anchor, this TPM chip or something similar, which is axiomatically trusted. By definition, trusted. And as long as you trust this thing, you can trust all other things measured by the TPM or by the hardware or by the software or whatever. This is trusted computing. Trusted computing needs this anchor of trust. Sometimes it's easy to have that one by putting in one of those chips. Or sometimes it's harder to get this, and you need to be a little bit clever in deciding which could be an anchor of trust. But you always need this anchor of trust. That is trusted computing. Now let's head over to the cool stuff. Probably shouldn't say that trusted computing is cool too. Trusted computing. Yeah, thumbs up. Now let's head over to the main content of this lecture, which is computational trust. And I'll tell you how to model computational trust, so this human sense of trust, how to make computers trust like humans trust. As I said before, computational trust is based on the concept of human trust, and this is the point in time where I usually ask the audience, how would you do that? How would you achieve that? What is your personal concept of trust? And after this awkward moment of silence, where everybody realizes, oh, I've never thought about how I actually trust or why I trust, then they usually come some brave people who break the silence and they say, okay, trust works like a prejudice. I have always been with great experiences in this one restaurant. So I trust this restaurant. And similar restaurants. I like pizza, and I had always good experiences at Pizza Hut. So any other pizza restaurant would also be good. So that's a prejudice, actually. Okay, in nice terms, you could say it's a stereotype. So you stereotype. And another idea of how human trust is usually means something like, I've done this before. I've done this before with you. I had lectures with this professor before, and he's good. He was good in the past. So I expect this professor to be good in the future too. So it can happen, trust can be founded on past experiences. Your personal past experiences. But also other people's experiences, which you call recommendations. Oh, you should definitely go to this place. It's a great place. You've never been there. No prior experiences. No prejudices, no nothing. You have a recommendation. And if someone recommends you to do something, it also acts as a basis for trust. And this usually goes on and on and on, and the audience has some more ideas. Cheers. And all of this is correct. All of these things are influence factors for computational trust. So let's get a little bit more formal and introduce terminology. Terminology that has been established in the field of computational trust research, so I'll share that with you. Don't worry, it's just 2 slides and they are not overly boring. So first of all, trust. There is a definition of trust from the 3 grand masters of computational trust, Diego Gambetta, Stephen Marsh, and Ordon Jösan. And they describe trust as a personal, subjective impression towards expected behavior, including the possibility of error. Now let's put these pieces together, or let's extract single pieces and explain them. Trust is a personal subjective impression. Personal means it's yours. Someone else might have a different kind of trust, a different type of trust, a different value of trust. And it's subjective, so it's not objective. It might be different. It might actually be wrong. It's subjective. It's what you believe, not what is objectively true. It's an impression towards expected behavior. So trust measures or makes statements about things that happen in the future, that you expect to happen. Usually I expect this to happen, and I trust in this to happen. But it includes the possibility of error. So this might not happen. You expect it to happen and you trust in it to happen, but it might not happen. And thus, trust carries the risk of being betrayed. You expected something to happen, you had trust in this something to happen, but it didn't happen for various reasons. It might be unintentionally. I trusted you in meeting me here in this lecture, but you broke your leg on the way here and you went to the hospital and you couldn't come. So you betrayed my trust in you coming to this lecture, but this was unintentionally. But it can also be maliciously. I trusted you, or no, let's put it the other way around. Let me be the bad guy. You trusted me in giving you this great bottle of whiskey, and you gave me money, and I decided to just take your money and run. I maliciously betrayed your trust in my expected behavior. Moreover, aside from the risk of being betrayed, trust heavily depends on context. I'll get to that later in detail, but for now, let's just say it depends on the expected behavior, on the context in which the expected behavior happens. Like, you can actually trust me in recommending you a good bottle of scotch. That's the context. In the context of scotch, you can trust me. But you cannot trust me in fixing your roof. So in the context of fixing a roof, you cannot trust me. That's the idea of context in trust. Besides trust, there's trustworthiness. As I said, trust is a personal and subjective impression. Trustworthiness actually is the objective amount of deserved trust. You don't know that. You cannot know the trustworthiness. If you knew the trustworthiness, so the objective amount of deserved trust, you would know the future. There would be no need to trust anymore. So trustworthiness is the thing you are interested in, but not the thing you get. Usually in computational trust, you use trust to estimate trustworthiness. That's an important sentence. You use trust and means of trust to estimate trustworthiness, and you base your decision on your trust instead of trustworthiness, because you don't know the trustworthiness. The trustworthiness is what would have been justified, but you only know this afterwards, not before you make a decision. Then there's reputation. Reputation, we already had this, as you, the audience, just mentioned that's one kind of trust. Reputation is what is generally believed or said about an entity. Wait, that sounds like trust to me. Why do we need a different term for that? Okay, actually, it's different. Trust is personal and subjective. Reputation is not personal anymore. It's still subjective. We all believe that Jean-Luc Picard is the best Starfleet captain. That's his reputation. But it's still not objective. We didn't measure this. He might turn into a Borg Locutus and try to conquer the world, and that wouldn't make him the best Starfleet captain anymore. But his reputation is, and we all believe that he's the best Starfleet captain. It's still subjective, the reputation, but it's not personal anymore. But reputation still carries the risk of betrayal. We all can be wrong in our assumption. It was important to mention that trust depends on context. I did that. Yes, I did that. Great. Then, last term, trust management. Trust management is what we do research on. Trust management are systems and methods to assess trust and to make decisions based on trust. So these are the tools we develop in order to make trust usable. There are usually two things that you do with trust management systems. First of all, you use them to make decisions based on trust. Do I buy this? Whatever, do I buy this book, or better spend the money on booze? And the other way is you present your own trustworthiness to others. You meet someone and they need to make a trust decision on you, and you want to present them information in order to enable them to build trust into you. Positive trust or negative trust, doesn't matter. But you want to present other people things that enable them to decide on you. For example, you want to sell something to someone and you want to present a measure of quality of this something that they can trust in. You can say, yeah, I make great things. And they don't know you. So they don't know what to do with this statement, but you can say, I made things that were approved by TÜV Hessen, which is a way to give them an information. Oh, I trust TÜV Hessen. Maybe I should trust this guy too. So trust management systems have two functions. One is to make decisions based on trust. The other one is to communicate your trustworthiness to others. Trust models. How do we model these trust things? How do we model trust in order to build a trust management system? Yeah, that's difficult. That's really difficult. And I cannot give you the one model that makes you happy, even worse. Let me explain it the following way. Computer science is a new field of research. We've been doing chemistry for ages. We've been doing computer science not so long. And in this new field of computer science, we're doing computational trust for a relatively short period of time. So it's a very young subfield of a young subfield of research. Computational trust, well, you could say 94, 2005, more, 94, Marsh's first book on that. One would say 1988 when Gambetta was introducing trust for the first time, but it's still young. Yes, dear audience, if you're born in the 80s, you are still young. I can assure you that. Anyhow, it's young and there's no consensus on one trust model yet in the research community. Even worse, I would say for every researcher in this field, you have like 2 trust models or 2-point-something trust models. There's not even a general direction yet how a trust model should look like or might look like. We don't know that yet. That's not the amount of knowledge we have acquired. That's not the amount of research that has been done. To be honest, I don't expect one such trust model. I don't expect it in the near future. There's a lot of research to be done before we end up with something we can consider a general trust model. There are 2 viewpoints. Well, 2 viewpoints, in my opinion. Again, probably more viewpoints than researchers, but 2 viewpoints that you can tackle trust models with. The one are the beliefs of Marsh and Dibben. They believe that trust is dispositional. So that trust is a personal trait of an entity. But they also believe that trust is something like learned trust. So you observe things from the past, you learn from your past experiences, and you build your trust based on that. We had this before when I asked you about how you would believe that trust works. And Marsh and Dibben believe in situational trust. So trust is actually a response to a specific situation. And if the situation changes, trust might change too. On the other side, there's Ordon Jösang. He believes in reliability trust. So he believes trust is actually something that just models how you depend on an entity, how you decide to depend or not to depend on an entity. And he believes in decision trust. So you use trust to make decisions. He believes every trust decision can be broken down to this decision if you want to engage in a situation or not. This also implies that there is something like an alternative to engaging in the situation. If you are forced to engage into a situation, you don't need trust anymore. You need to do it. No alternative. And there's one trust model that I want to present you, not just because I worked on it, but because the great folks at TK Lab who are organizing this lecture actually designed and came up and improved this trust model, and it's called CertainTrust. The CertainTrust trust model, I need to drink a bit. The CertainTrust trust model says trusts are actually opinions on statements. So what is an opinion? What is a statement? So CertainTrust assumes that trust is actually something that you have an opinion on a specific statement. That's where the context comes from. And an opinion is a triple, can be modeled as a triple, TCF. You see it, oops, where's the cursor? Here. And the first aspect, the T, is the trust value. It's defined as the amount of belief in the correctness of the statement. So you have a statement, and you believe it is correct. And with trust, you measure how much you believe that this statement is correct. That sounds difficult at first, but in the end, it just means how much you assume that the statement is correct. The second part of the triple is the certainty value. And the certainty value is, now it gets a little bit difficult, is the probability that your amount of belief, that your trust is in fact a correct estimate. Ooh. Well, let's say you believe you have a statement that you know almost nothing about it, but you believe it's true. Would mean your trust value is high, even though you have no solid evidence to base it on. Then your certainty value would probably be low, because the certainty value reflects how much evidence you base your trust on. So the certainty as a probability that the trust is correct helps you in evaluating the trust, which is your belief that a statement is correct. And besides trust and certainty, you also have the initial trust value denoted by small f. This is the amount of belief that you use when nothing is known about the statement. You have no evidence to base your trust on. Your trust value is totally oblivious. You don't know it. In this case, you use initial trust, like systemic trust, for example, like things you've learned, like what can I say, reputation, or you trust a dealer less than you trust a banking institute. Maybe that's a bad statement. You trust a dealer less than you trust a chef at a restaurant, things like that. So whenever your trust is not sufficient, you use the initial trust value. And based on that opinion, on that triple, you can calculate an expectation value. An expectation value, that's here the second formula. An expectation value on an opinion, on a statement, a lot of ons here. And the expectation value is the expected outcome when you rely on the statement. The statement is something that you expect to happen in the future. The trust is how much you believe that it's correct. The certainty is how probably it is that your belief is correct. And the expectation value is something like a probability that the statement is actually correct when you rely on it. And as you can see, it's fairly simple. It's a ratio in between the trust value multiplied with the certainty. So that means the belief I have with the probability that it's correct. And in addition, you fill all that certainty that you don't have, 1 minus certainty, you fill it up with the initial trust value. So you use all that trust, as much certainty as you have. And for the remaining certainty that you don't have from your trust, you use the initial trust value. Let that sink for a moment. This is definitely one of the things that you probably want to think about after this lecture again. Okay. Besides CertainTrust, which is a model to model trust, there is a logic, cleverly named certain logic, which allows you to perform calculations on opinions. Sometimes your decisions are based on multiple opinions. Should I wear a cape when I leave the house? It depends on your opinion what the weather will be like, what the social standard on wearing stuff will be like. It will, on your opinion, how you would feel like if, for example, it starts to rain, or people will look weirdly at you because you don't wear a coat and it's -5 degrees centigrade outside, stuff like that. And with certain logic, you can combine opinions. You can actually perform calculations on opinions. But I'm not going into that in this lecture. Lucky you. You can read our publications on that if you feel happy or brave or whatever. The other way that trust management systems are important are in order to communicate trust. Let's have a look at this fine web page over here. What can I say? It's about a product. It's about a computer game called Age of Empires. Some of you might know it because it's actually the finest game in the world, the best computer game, undeniably the best computer game you can imagine. It's pretty darn old, but it's the best computer game you can imagine. Trust me. Haha. And you see it's the Amazon web page, and you have ratings on that. And you have several different ways to communicate trust on that. For example, over here, denoted by the little one, you have the star rating. You know the star rating. Up to 5 stars, 1 star is bad, 5 stars is great. Everything else is somewhere in between. You see it doesn't deserve, but it has 2 out of 5 stars, which means, oh, it's got a bad rating, so low trust. That's a way to communicate trust. It has drawbacks, of course. I'll come to that in a second. The second way to communicate trust that Amazon employs, I mean, there are many other ways to communicate trust. The second way that Amazon employs is actually this kind of histogram here over all the ratings. So it shows you these 2 out of 5 ratings are actually composed out of a lot of 1-star ratings, quite some 5-star ratings, and a few in-between ratings, which are, this is typical, this J-shaped curve. So if you tilt this by 90 degrees, you see an uppercase J. This J-shaped curve is actually typical for realistic ratings. If you don't have the J-shape, someone might have faked ratings or stuff like that. And even more, the in-between ratings are actually the more important ones, but I'll not go into detail. You can read my book or publications on that. TK Lab publications, great. So this is a better way, or at least a different way that transforms or transports more information on the trust value. It shows you actually a distribution. And then there's this information. The trust statement is actually based on 202 statements from customers. Wow, it's not statements from someone, it's statements from customers. And it's quite a lot. Should I buy the game that has a 5-star rating based on 1 customer statement, or should I buy the game that has a 4-star rating based on 200 customers? Which statement is more reliable? Which trust is more founded? Which is a better estimate for trustworthiness? And the fourth way Amazon transforms these things or transports trust, whoops, here's the cursor, is actually, yeah, you can click on that and read all the 202 ratings given in text. It's not viable for computers, well, text mining stuff, blah, 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 but it's much more difficult than just averaging numbers or stuff like that. But that's also a way to communicate trust. Let me quickly summarize. You have an average score, which can be a trust statement. You have score histogram. You have an amount of scores, or just head into full details, the detailed textual reviews. These are all ways to communicate trust. Some kind of trust. Actually, there's some kind of weird mixed up recommendations. You can communicate trust visually, and TK Lab came up with 2 ways to do this, and one is the Human Trust Interface by Sebastian Ries. You can see it's nice, it's colorful. You can see it has 2 axes. It has a trust axis down here and a certainty axis. So you can denote the trust and its certainty value from this opinion triple in here. The color gradient in the background depicts the F value, so the initial trust value, and the data point is actually the calculated expectation value for your opinion. So for this opinion being displayed here, it's slightly in the greenish way, and we all know green is better than yellow, is better than orange, is better than red. So your expectation value here is quite high. But you also see you have a trust value, it's not that high, and actually your certainty value is also just a little bit above average, but in total the expectation value is high. And later we realized many trust-based decisions, well, they found on more than one opinion. So we needed a way to show multiple opinions at once, because multiple opinions at once, and I need to move my hat over here, multiple opinions at once might influence your decision. And then we came up with T-Viz, which is a multi-criterial version of the Human Trust Interface. In this example, and I'm not sure if I can read this, depending on the encoder of this video, if you can read this, this is a T-Viz denoting multiple opinions on a laptop computer. It shows you battery lifetime, design, build quality, usability, and over here, performance. Where's the cursor? Over here, performance, battery lifetime, and so on. And it's also nice and colorful, but it's not square anymore. Anyhow, you can show multiple opinions concurrently here to give you a notation on context. You have an aggregated rating in the center, which probably isn't worth a lot unless you want a quick overview, a quick comparison. The height of every of these pi segments denotes the trust. The higher the pi segment, the more trust you have. So this is the T value from an opinion. The width, or let's say the relative width of a pi segment, denotes the certainty value. And the color is the expectation value. So 2 examples. For the battery lifetime, you have quite low trust, but you have a lot of certainty. It fills almost all this part of the graph. On the other hand, for, let's say, it's performance. For performance, you have a high trust, but you have low certainty. It's a very narrow pi segment. So all of this can be fused together in the T-Viz. Which brings me to a section of this lecture which is probably more interesting to you: real-world applications of computational trust. Where can you use it? I mean, it's so new. It's used in some cases, but very primitively. Where can you use it in its full power? And I'll quickly go over this. First example is the Web PKI. This is research that I did with many great people. For example, Johannes Braun and Jiska Klaassen. And for those of you who haven't heard of the Web PKI yet, I'll give you a quick primer on that. The Web PKI, the Web Public Key Infrastructure, protects you while you are surfing in the internet, while you're browsing the internet. Isn't that great? It actually does that by authenticating certificates that you are using in encrypted connections. So, for example, I'll go to the banking web page or to the web page of my banking institute, and you see this little padlock symbol. And if it's closed and green or yellow or whatever your browser shows you, informations from authentication or from certificates are authenticated and everything works fine. They say, yeah, that's great. So in the end, the Web PKI, the core function of the Web PKI is it tells you if the server you are speaking to or your browser is speaking to is actually the server that you are expecting. It's not fraudulent, it's not forged. The Web PKI doesn't say anything about the quality of web pages or the maliciousness of web pages. It just tells you if you are speaking to the right person or to the expected person or not. How does it do that? It uses certificates, that's what I already said, and it uses certificate chains. I'll do that the other way around, even though the animation implies that I should have said something now. So the idea is every web server has a so-called certificate over here. And this certificate has been issued by a so-called certificate authority or a sub-certificate authority, sub-CA. And the sub-CA also has a certificate, which has been issued by someone else. And this chain goes on, and at the end, eventually you end up at the certificate of root CA. This hasn't been issued by anybody. This is something that is hard-coded, or not hard-coded, but that is stored on your computer. These are certificate authorities that you yourself fully trust. You have decided to trust them. And they delegate their trust to sub-CAs, to other sub-CAs, to other sub-CAs, and so on, until we end up at the server that you are communicating with. In fact, you haven't decided on that, your browser vendor or your operating system vendor has decided on that, but that's the idea, that's the gist. And the validation algorithm the Web PKI uses is a pretty simple recursive algorithm, and it says a certificate is valid if and only if the crypto holds, of course, all the cryptographic stuff must be correct, and either the issuing CA certificate is valid, so that's the recursive step, or the issuing CA certificate is locally known, which means it's a root CA. So you check every certificate in this chain up until you end at a root CA that you trust. And the trust of this root CA is delegated to all others down to the certificate of the server that you are communicating with. That's the idea of the Web PKI. I know that there's a whole lecture on that at TU Darmstadt, but that's all that I could fit into a slide. Okay, what's the issue with the Web PKI? Yeah, the issue is, or one of the many issues is, all of those root certificates are fully trusted, which is stupid. That's not true. Some of them are fully trusted, yes. And then there are some maybe some root CAs that you shouldn't trust, but they are fully trusted. It's binary. Either you have this root certificate, then you trust it, or you don't have the root certificate, then you don't trust it. There's nothing in between. And there might be certificates that you shouldn't trust at all, but have in your root CA, like these over here. Or even worse, a sub-CA has created a certificate for someone you shouldn't trust. You should trust Deutsche Telekom root CA, which is the one that the TU Darmstadt web servers are based on. That's their root CA. So Deutsche Telekom gave a certificate to Deutsches Forschungsnetz to TUDA, and TUDA to, whatever, all their servers. And for some reason it might have happened that TUDA also gave a certificate to Eve. That's not a problem. But now Eve starts issuing their own certificates, like one for my banking institute. That sucks. We already have one for my banking institute. It's valid. It's from Semantic CA, from certified by VeriSign CA. And now we have a second one. That's also fine. It's indistinguishable from this one. It has been issued by a CA, that has been certified by a CA, that has been certified by a CA, that has been certified by a root CA. Damn it, that's a valid certificate. And it shouldn't be. In order to cope with this, we said, okay, let's do real trust in the Web PKI, not this binary stuff of trust. I was about to say profanity here, but I shouldn't be doing that because it's on a recording. If you want to enjoy this lecture next year again, you want to enjoy it, but not because you failed the test. So if you are in this lecture next year again, maybe we are live and you'll hear some profanities from me. Anyhow, we wanted to replace this binary trust with a sophisticated trust model, and we choose CertainTrust, of course, because we knew it. And we said, instead of relying on these vendor-defined root lists of certificates, that they are 100% trustworthy, let's learn trust scores for the CAs that we need, which are the CAs that we actually encounter. So we learn trust scores. How do we do that? Let's assume here on the leftmost part, let's assume here we meet this end entity number 1. And the certificate chain is root CA1 has issued a certificate for sub CA1, which has issued a certificate for end entity 1. And let's say for some external reason we know or we learn that end entity 1 certificate is fine. We ask notaries, we did something like certificate pinning, stuff like that. There are means to check a certificate. And we accepted this certificate. That means that the sub-CA, the one that issued the certificate, should get a reward for that. A positive experience. Positive prior experience. We know, trust, things we had in the past, we can learn from that. So sub-CA1, it should be sub-CA1 here, it's a typo, collects a positive experience as it is rewarded for issuing a correct certificate for end entity 1. And the root CA collects a positive experience for correctly issuing a certificate for the sub-CA. All of this is done just by visiting the web page or the server, communicating with the server of end entity 1. Later that day, the middle part happens. We meet end entity 2, and the certificate chain is actually root CA1, issued a certificate for another root CA2. This up here is a typo. This is no typo. Root CA issued a certificate for sub CA2, which itself issued a certificate for end entity 2. By external means, we figure out that entity 2 is fine, the certificate is fine. We reward sub CA2 and we reward root CA1 because sub CA2 actually issued a positive thing, a valid certificate for end entity 2. That's this little arrow over here. And the root CA did something positive. They issued this little arrow. They issued a valid certificate for sub CA number 2. Afterwards, we meet the rightmost scenario. We meet end entity 3, which has a certificate issued by sub CA2, which itself, we already know that, has a certificate from root CA1. And by external means, we figure out that end entity 3 certificate is actually wrong, maliciously issued, invalid, whatever. It's rejected. And now we punish sub CA2. Sub CA2 collects a negative experience. That's that little minus sign here. Because sub CA2 did something wrong in issuing this certificate for end entity 3. However, root CA number 1 gathers no new experience because we didn't learn anything new about it. This arrow over here, the certificate from root CA1 to sub CA2, we already know about this. And it has nothing to do with the misbehavior of sub CA2 issuing a certificate for end entity number 3. That's why the root CA collects no experience, no positive and no negative. Let's continue this game. End entity number 4. We meet end entity number 4 over here from a totally different sub CA number 3 and a totally different root CA number 1. Root CA number 2. And we reject the certificate of end entity 4 too. However, the certificate for sub CA2 is accepted. That's totally fine. Just EE4 is wrong. CA3 is fine. Thus, CA number 3 collects a negative experience because they issued this arrow over here, a wrong certificate or bad certificate for end entity 4. As the certificate for sub CA2, this arrow here or this arrow here is actually fine, the root CA collects a positive experience. And now the last thing happens, we meet this chain over here. Root CA1 issues to sub CA number 2, issues to sub CA number 3, issues to end entity 5. End entity 5 is accepted. So sub CA2 consequently collects a positive experience. This arrow here is fine. They did something good. Sub CA number 2 collects a positive experience because we don't know this arrow yet and everything went fine. However, root CA does not collect any experience because we already knew this arrow. Nothing has changed. No new information was gained. That's how you build up. That's how you collect experiences. And from these experiences, you can see which CAs behave good and which CAs behave slightly less good. And you've come from this binary trust representation, every CA is good, to, oh, I've learned about this experience and this CA. And in my experience, this CA does mostly good. So we now have not this binary model anymore, but we can have distinct states in between. While we were doing this research, bad things happened, and these were the things that usually happen when you do research. Someone else also does research on that. And while publishing this, Google actually came out with their own solution to the problem, and they call it certificate transparency. It was first mentioned 2013 in RFC 6962, and you can read it if you want to. And it is now mandatory, not now, since October 2017, it was rolled out by Google's Chrome browser. And so everyone has to do it because Google's Chrome browser has the market power. Market power solves crypto problem, interesting approach, not by intelligence or research, but just by market power. And they say the following. Google said, this part here, that this CA for Eve is created, that's actually fine. It doesn't harm anyone. This part down here, that this maliciously behaving CA creates wrongful certificates that are indistinguishable from valid ones, from legitimate ones. This must not happen anymore. And the bad part with this happening is that the owner of the server, of the original certificate, does not know that this second certificate for his server exists. He simply doesn't know. If he knew it, he could just call Deutsche Telekom root CA or TU Darmstadt root CA or DFN Verein CA and tell them, hey, there's a certificate, it's issued by you, can you please revoke it? But as long as the original owner does not know about this second certificate, that's a problem. And certificate transparency solves exactly this problem. How do they do that? Well, I have condensed it into one slide. If you are into such things, read the RFC. It's mildly interesting, mostly harmless. Okay, the following thing should happen. Every CA that issues a certificate must announce this certificate to so-called certificate transparency logs. These logs, they are just lists of certificates. They are independently operated, they are distributed, and they are cryptographically secured. Actually, something like blockchains. It's interesting. Have a look at the RFC if you're interested in that. If you're really interested in that and want to do research on that, go to the folks at TK and ask them for a job. They always have great jobs for you, good payment, and the jobs at TK, you won't start stapling stuff or cooking coffee or organizing files. You would do actually research. So if you want to do research on that, ask the folks at TK or ask me. But first ask the guys at TK because they are into this topic. Okay, these certificate transparency logs are more or less, you cannot fake them because they are independently operated, they are distributed, and they are somewhat secured. And the idea behind these transparency logs is the Google Chrome browser will only accept certificates that at first validate by the rules of the Web PKI, and they must be listed in at least 2 certificate transparency lists. And as expected, all browsers will have to follow, and by now in 2020, almost every browser implements certificate transparency. So why does this work? Let's have a look. The correct way is, or the way that it goes for a correctly issued certificate is, whenever a new certificate is issued, the Symantec wants to create a certificate for the banking portal. It submits the new certificate, creates the certificate and submits it to 2 lists. And whenever someone visits the bankingportal.naspa.de webpage, the browser checks if it's valid by the Web PKI rules and then checks if the certificate is listed in at least 2 of the transparency lists. If this is the case, browser connects to the web page, everything is fine. What happens, and now I need to move here again, outside of the screen. What happens in our second case? We have this maliciously issued, valid, by the means of Web PKI, certificate over here. What happens? Eve CA wants to issue that certificate. So Eve can either decide not to submit it to transparency lists, so the browser would not connect to the web page, or Eve submits it to transparency lists. Now it is publicly known that this certificate exists because everyone can have a look at the transparency lists. So the owner of bankingportal.naspa.de, this one, can figure out, oh, there's a second certificate, and I didn't want this certificate. It's not from me, it's not for me. And the owner now can call TU DACA or DFN Verein or Deutsche Telekom in order to revoke this. So either way, either Eve does not publish it to lists, browser wouldn't connect, or Eve published it to lists and the original owner would notice that there's a certificate that shouldn't be there. That's the whole trick for certificate transparency logs. Well, there's just a little bit of trust in certificate transparency logs. Actually, it solves the problem without using a lot of trust. But there are open questions. Open questions means, when I say open question, it means I don't have an answer. These are future research directives. So if you want to do that, ask the guys at TK, or the gals at TK, the gals and guys at TK, the folks at TK. If you can do research on that, if they are interested in that, they will help you, most likely. And the open questions are, which of the logs do I use? They are independently operated, so there can be a lot of them. How do I know that they exist? Which should I use? Which should I trust? That's where trust comes in. Should I use specific ones, all the same ones all the time? Should I just use all of them? How do I know all of them? Should I just use random ones? How do I decide which random ones? And the other question is, how do I estimate now this trustworthiness of such transparency logs? Can they be forged? Can there be just an Eve opening up two transparency logs and submitting the wrong certificate to two transparency logs, which are then randomly chosen and correctly verified? And even furthermore, is the trustworthiness of these transparency logs, is that really a relevant question? Especially if you think about how to choose which transparency logs you use? Yeah, questions over questions, open research, go for it. Second example or second application of computational trust is rating decomposition. You might not have heard of rating decomposition. That's fine, I'll explain it to you. Looking at the clock, this would also be a good time for a break. We're on a recording, you can have a break whenever you want to. Just hit the big pause button and never come back. No, please come back. So you can have a break. Now I'll just continue, but as we are not in synchronous mode, that's going to be fine for you. Enjoy your break. Okay, rating decomposition. When you have a trust score for a system, that is usually a somewhat combination of trust values for the components within the system. So every component of the system contributes to the overall trust value of the system. So you combine the components' trust value and you end up with a trust value for the overall system. How you do that, totally unimportant for this lecture. Some kind of logic method, whatever. You combine these values. For example, here what I did, I just did a weighted average. That's the overall. But you could do whatever you want. You have single components, they have trust values, all of them together, amalgamated by some kind of logic or math or whatever, gives you a trust score for the whole service. But that is actually not the thing that interests you. Most of the time you don't want to know the overall system trust. You can easily calculate that. But you want to derive a component's trust from the overall trust. You want to deduce the trust in parts of a system from the full picture of the system. For example, you're a car dealer and a customer brings back a car and says, "This car is shit, I don't like it. Take it back." That's an important information. The overall rating for the car is obviously bad, but it doesn't help you. You now know the customer is unhappy, but it doesn't help you. You want to know why the customer is unhappy. You want to know what to change at the car. It can't be the whole car that's bad. You want to know what to change on the car in order to have a better experience with your customers next time. For example, the customer can come to you and say, "I hate this car, it's a bad car, because the radio has bad reception." You don't know that unless you start asking the customer, "Is the left wheel okay? Is the right wheel okay? Is the back left wheel, back right wheel okay? Is the color of the car fine? Is the left door fine?" All this stuff. You won't get that information. You probably don't even know which questions to ask. But if you knew that it was the radio that, whose performance resulted in the bad rating for the overall car, you could just fix the radio and thus improve the rating of the car. And that is something that you want to know, not only for car dealerships, but for every combined system. You want to know why you have a bad rating in order to improve the overall system, or at least the overall rating. And this is quite a challenge to figure this out. First of all, a trust score, an overall trust score, is an act of information reduction. You have a lot of trust scores for your components, and you make, out of these, you make one trust score. You reduce information. So a trust score is an act of information reduction. You don't know the individual trust scores anymore. You don't know the weights that were used to combine them. You don't even know the formulas, the logic that was used to combine these into an overall trust statement. And even worse, a review or a rating, that's not trust. A review or a rating is an expression of satisfaction. It's not a quality assessment. It's an expression of satisfaction, which means someone had an expectation or an assumption on how good something would be, the overall system would be, and compared to their expectation, the performance is rated. So a customer that is satisfied will give a good rating, regardless of the quality of the product. If the expectations were low and the product is actually of bad quality, yeah, the satisfaction with the customer would be achieved anyway. And of course, the other way around. So trust is subjective, it's not objective. One customer might be perfectly happy with a pink car, while another customer might not. One might accept bad radio reception, another customer might not expect that. Even worse, the impression or the rating for a car. No customer sits at home and does the math and calculates all the individual scores. You might not know the formulas, even worse, there might not even be any combination formulas. Anyhow, there is an overall rating, an expression of satisfaction. So these are the challenges when you want to decompose a rating into individual trust scores. And I spent quite some time on that and came up with intercomponent rating. So for the sake of the example, let's have a very simple one. Imagine a photo book service. A photo book, that's a book that shows you printed pictures. And a photo book service consists of a photo service, the one that delivers the pictures, a layout service, the one that makes the layout given the pictures, and a print service that takes the layout and the pictures and prints the actual book and gives it to the customer. And it goes like this. Oh, where's my cursor? Here's my cursor. The photo service selects photos, gives them to the layout service. The layout service takes the photos, makes a layout out of it, gives all of this to the print service makes a book, gives it to the customer. And now we have intermediate information that we can use. We are the publisher and want to know the individual scores for these three services based on the customer rating. Well, we can use additional information. For example, while the customer can only give you a measure of satisfaction, the layout service can actually give you a quality assessment on the output of the photo service. Because the layout service is a professional layout service. They get photos all the time. They can assess the quality of the photos. So they can give you actually a measurement, a rating for the photo service. Not an expression of satisfaction, but a measurement. As can the print service give you are the publisher, as can the print service give you a measurement on the quality of the layout service. And the customer somewhat rates the overall quality output, but that's not really a quality assessment, that's an expression of satisfaction. That's cool. Let me quickly switch back. So if the customer says, no, I don't like this, here's the cursor. The customer says, no, I don't like this photo book. You can see, oh, the layout service told me the photos are bad. So the bad rating from the customer is probably due to the photo service not performing good. Or the layout service said, yeah, great, best pictures I've ever seen. And the print service says, oh no, that layout is actually pretty bad. So photo service, great. Print service, probably great. Layout service, no, not good, because the print service gave them a bad rating. But there are inherent errors or inherent flaws in the system. You have inherited errors. So, as I previously said, if the photo service gives a bad quality to the layout service can do a layout, but based on bad photos. And the print service will print based on a bad layout, and the customer will give it a bad rating. So the layout service doesn't have any chance to get a good rating if it receives bad photos, because it receives bad photos and tells the publisher, okay, the photos were bad, but then it gives a layout with bad photos to the print service, and the print service says, oh, the layout was bad. So the print service will report a bad rating for the layout service, even though the original culprit was the photo service. So that's this garbage in, garbage out problem. So if one service performs bad, the consecutive service will receive, if one service performs bad, it will get a bad rating from the next service. But even when the next service performs good, it will consequently receive a bad service by the next service because of the bad input they had. And the solution we came up with is to evaluate output rating depending on the given input rating. That sounds strange at first, but follow me to this. This is a performance function. The performance function is nothing more but a relation between input quality and output quality. So you yourself rate the quality of the input that you receive. And you yourself give your output to the next service, which then rates its own input quality, which is your output quality. So you rate your input quality and someone else rates your output quality. And the performance function is a relation between input quality and output quality. Like this one. Input quality here, output quality here. If the output rating you receive is above the graph, is above the plotted line, then you did good. So let's put this another way. A performance function is a promise that you make. It's the promise that you make towards the service owner. When I get this kind of input quality, I will produce this kind of output quality. When I get input quality 0.4, I will produce output quality 0.4. If I get input quality 0.6, I will produce output quality slightly below 0.8. So that is the promise that you make. And based on that promise and the rating for the input quality that you gave and the rating for your output quality, someone can deduce if you did a good job or not. There might be things where you get so bad input that it's impossible for you to create good input. So if you get input of quality 0 or even 0.2, you won't be able to produce good output. So you say, I produce at least output quality 0. And if someone rates you output quality 0.1, that's good for you because you did as you promised. Later might be the same. Here, in which the output quality improves with the input quality, and over here, that's where it goes beyond the limits of your capabilities. Even though the input quality improves further, your output quality won't improve. And whenever the rating you receive for your output is above the line, then it's good for you. And if it's below the line, it means regardless of the input quality, you couldn't hold your promise. These are performance functions. Some of you, and I see some faces over there, I intend or just imagine to see some faces over there. Some of you might have noticed cheating is still possible. Okay, you know your performance function and you have some idea on the quality rating that you will get for your output. And if you already know that you will get a bad rating, okay, you just limit your input rating. You get a perfectly fine set of photos and you tell the service operator, oh, these photos are really, really bad. And then you do a bad layout and get a bad rating for your layout. And the other one says, oh yeah, you got a bad rating for the layout, but the input was already bad, so you fulfilled your performance function. So you can still cheat here. And one of the drawbacks that was not eliminated by it, the final assessment, so the assessment for the output quality of the last service in the chain, is still rated by the customer. And that's still not a quality assessment. That's a subjective review or rating. So these are two limits of intercomponent rating and performance functions. Okay, we're getting close to the end of the lecture. So everyone wake up, take another sip, and we'll be done in like 5 slides. Okay, let's get away from these practical implications and speak about the inner workings of computational trust. Where it comes from, it's more a philosophical thing. Aspects that I want to draw your attention to, but that they are not in any specific application context. First of all, we always need to differentiate trust from reputation. Reputation is a technique that only knows recommendations. It's not subjective. You have no direct experiences. It is what is generally believed about an entity. There's no subjective bias. Everyone just knows that Jean-Luc Picard is the best Starfleet captain. You have no experiences with him, but his reputation is great. That is not trust. It's not personal. It's still subjective, but it's not personal. Trust, on the other hand, has many more influence factors than just recommendations. Recommendations are a valid input factor for trust, but there are many others. Trust is subjective and it is personal, which means trust is different for everyone. You might trust Jean-Luc Picard to be the best Starfleet captain at all, but if you ask my dear colleague Sasha, he will probably tell you, no, Ben Sisko is the best Starfleet captain. So trust is quite different from reputation. Never ever confuse these two. Even in your real life outside computer science, these two things are often confused by people. They are two totally different things. And I told you, yeah, computational trust, there are almost as many models as there are researchers in this field. I don't believe that this is the right way. And I want to, motivate everyone to get back to observing society. Observing in the good way, not the Orwellian way of observing society, which is always also a thing that computer scientists are involved with. And, well, ethics, that's a different thing. You should have strong ethics. Anyway, trust stems from sociology and philosophy. And we have a lot of researchers which do trust models based on what we currently know. They formalize what we know, what we think it's true, what we think or believe we understood, and we build a model from that. Great. That's engineering. That's something we can do. But then again, we haven't understood what trust is. We have understood some parts, but we don't know how the pieces fit together. And I want to motivate people to go back to sociology and philosophy and learn more about what trust really is, rather than developing yet another model for what we already know. And I believe, and not only me, but I can only speak for myself, I believe our understanding just scratches the surface of what trust really is. So there's much more to win in terms of research when we try to understand trust than when we try to build yet another model. Then there's Dunbar's number. That's an interesting aspect. It's a measure for social distance. Not social distance as 1.5 meters corona, social distance as in trust distance. And Dunbar is a researcher who suggested a way of measuring a maintainable social, or an amount of maintainable social interactions. And this yielded, and this is the interesting part, but the other thing is interesting too, but for us interesting in this context, the interesting part is this limit for social interactions yielded a measure for group dynamics. And Dunbar proposed several different Dunbar numbers describing group sizes, so limits of intensity of social interaction or social distance. And these group sizes, they fit very well with trust assumptions and with trust mechanisms. So, for example, he said there's something called a clique. Nothing from graph theory. There's something called a clique, and these are those 5 people that you would ask for help in a difficult emotional situation. Your family, your best friends, these folks. And then there's a sympathy group. This is a group of 15 people. Of those 15 people that you have close relationships with. And there are camps, 50 people, not so close relationships. 150 people, 500 people, 1,500 people, even more. And for all these groups, different trust mechanisms work. For your clique, you probably don't have to believe or think about if your trust is context dependent. You just trust these 5 people to be benevolent towards you. You don't need to evaluate your trust based on context. For larger groups, that's already different. For larger groups, like those 150 people in your close surroundings, or ask me not, those 5,000 people in the city you live in, you need context. You trust your butcher in doing good meat for you, but you probably would not trust your butcher in baking bread, for example. So this is where context comes into play. Even worse, you have a larger group, people you encounter only once. If you have this merchant in your close surroundings that you meet every day or every week, this merchant has no idea or no intention to trick you because he wants you as a returning customer. If you have a merchant somewhere else that you only encounter once in your life, this merchant might think about tricking you, because you would not encounter him anymore. It would make no difference if you love him or do not love him or such. Even larger groups, then you start to have the need for social mechanisms like rules, law, jurisdiction, police to enforce things. You don't need contracts in your clique. Definitely not. Or even worse, you go beyond the aspect of countries. You need international law. You need international enforcement, which we don't really have. These are all different trust mechanisms that apply depending on the group size. And this is something what you can use Dunbar numbers for. I would have loved to do research in that, but I never could find the time. I could never find the time. Okay, last slide. We're coming to the end of the lecture. And for those of you who think, yeah, that's cool, I want to do that. I want to learn more about this great topic of relevance. I'll give you some reading. You might want to look up the following keywords: Dunbar's number, conformity, social pressure, fairness, regret, and comfort. These are things that I personally believe will become relevant aspects in the computational trust research in the next years, if they aren't already. If I should recommend you one book, well, of course, if I was egoistic, almost dropped my bottle, buy my book. Whoops, how can you see? Buy this book. I'm invisible. If I had a productive day, read this course's curriculum, because it will help you to pass the course's test, and this is your main goal in this. But if I had one of those eyes in the sky days and want to change the world, read this book. Read this book, Liars and Outliers by Bruce Schneier. There's a German translation, Die Kunst des Vertrauens, a quite good translation. I can also recommend this if you don't want to read the English original. I can really recommend this book if you want to understand more on trust. It's not driven by computer science ideas. It's driven by sociology ideas, and you can make the transfer to computer science yourself. So these are the references I use in this talk. Whoops. This is how you can contact me. I'm on social media. I have a personal email address. I have a business email address. Just contact me with any questions regarding this topic or any other topic that you think I might be proficient in. For most of the formal things of this lecture, please ask the folks at TK Lab at TU Darmstadt. Yeah, that's it. Enjoy your last bit of drink, and I'll see you, hopefully not because you failed the test, but I'll see you around maybe next year. See you somewhen. Have a nice evening. Cheers.